Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Ooh, Rhonda.
Oh, goodness. Hello, David, and welcome to all our listeners around the country, around the world, throughout the galaxy. Today, we are recording episode 447, and our topic is perfectionism. David?
Yes. So here's what you're going to get in today's podcast. Perfectionism is something we're all familiar with. It's not a new theme, but it's always an incredibly important and immediate theme and current theme, because almost everyone I've seen in my career has had some perfectionism, and maybe you have too. And what I'm saying is telling yourself, I'm not good enough, or I shouldn't have screwed up. I kind of had it bite me yesterday. We had a fantastic live audio session with Q&As from some beautiful people, but one woman toward the end was just sobbing uncontrollably, and I just felt so horribly afterwards, because it wasn't a therapy seminar. It was just a Q&A session for the general public. And the pain was very real. But in that case, it was a good pain, because I thought, well, maybe I could email her and, spend a little time with her and help her out, because she was looking for help. And lo and behold, an email from her magically appeared in my inbox, and we've been having a great dialogue. But it's sometimes the pain of failure becomes so intense that people go into a severe depression. So if you've ever been self-critical or wanted to find greater joy in your life, today we'll be talking about the 2025 update on perfectionism. And we're going to have Adam Holman, a fantastic colleague and expert, with us, along with the gorgeous and brilliant Rhonda Borowski. And delightful, I should say.
Oh, thank you, David. And I want to welcome Adam to our podcast. Adam's a licensed clinical social worker. He has over 10 years experience providing therapy, including team therapy. His specialties are technology and screen addictions, working with both the person, especially the teenager who has it, and their family, social anxiety, and feeling like you're not good enough. Adam's been on 2 previous podcasts. On 288, where he actually dove into how to use team therapy for video game addiction, and that was in April 18th, I believe, of 2022. And he also returned on podcast 368, which we titled A Strange Paradox, when Adam described the impact of a Feeling Good podcast on his clinical work and what he learned when he went on a hike in Prescott, Arizona. And Adam moved from Prescott, Arizona to San Francisco in January of 2025 when he joined the Feeling Great app team. So how's it going, Adam?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here talking to all of you again, and of course to be here with you, David, and you, Rhonda, to talk today about perfectionism, something near and dear to my heart.
Cool. Well, let me start with an endorsement that Harold wrote to us. And Harold wrote, "Hi, David. I hope you've been keeping well. I just want to thank you for your podcast response to my question on negative thoughts about the world, which was in podcast number 422. And I believe that Harold's question was the 4th one we answered." Harold continued, "I absolutely love it. I think your response was awesome. Thank you in particular for your uplifting words on my determination to get better. You could barely have been more encouraging, and that means so much to me. With very best wishes, Harold."
Well, thank you, Harold, and thank you, Adam. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. And Adam gave up his full-time practice in Arizona to join the Feeling Great podcast development team, and you've been working with us, Adam, in the AI, and I've just been so excited to work with you. And you've joined our Tuesday teaching group at Stanford, where you're a small group leader. And every time you open your mouth, that I've heard, of course, you probably only publicly show the good stuff, but you make such wonderfully articulate and warm and wise comments. I thought, boy, it'd be great to have Adam on an Ask David podcast, and so hopefully we will get you on at least one of the perfectionism questions, and maybe if we have time to do a second podcast with some really kick-ass questions as well. So welcome again, Adam.
Thank you. And yeah, naturally going through a bunch of changes, including helping on the app and being in the Tuesday group and being here, sparked up a lot of the perfectionism in me. And so it's also just very topical because it was very recent that I ended up dealing with it again in myself.
Oh, but what I forgot to mention was that although he's doing full-time work on the app, he also has one day a week to continue his clinical practice. So we'll put his contact information in the show notes in case any of you are so blown away by how cool he is, and I'm sure you will be, and you want to get some good team therapy from a kind person who's a real expert. You'll be able to do so, but you'll have to act fast because with only one day a week, he's going to fill up pretty quickly, and maybe already is for all I know.
Yeah, I have room for a few folks on occasion, but yeah, with one day a week, it is very limited.
Okay, so shall I read the question that sparked this podcast?
Yeah, this was a great question. I got very excited by it. I thought, boy, Adam, if we could get him to come on together, we could turn this into something really, really cool.
Okay, well, this question came all the way from North Macedonia, which just goes to show.
So many of our questions do.
Which goes to show the reach of the Feeling Good podcast and your work, David. It's exciting. So, dear Dr. Burns, I'd be truly honored if my questions could be considered for a future episode of your Ask David podcast. Your work has been a key influence in my research on perfectionism and its cognitive behavioral aspects. Here are a few brief questions I'm currently exploring. How has your view of perfectionism evolved since writing your book, Feeling Good? What strategies have you found most effective for challenging perfectionistic thinking in therapy? Is perfectionism often rooted in a fear of not being good enough? How does perfectionism typically manifest in academic or professional environments? If you happen to include any of these in a future episode, I'd be grateful if you could let me know so I can tune in. Thank you again for your time and for the lasting impact of your work. With warm regards. I don't know if he wants me to read his whole name, but he is a doctoral student.
Oh, well, I'm sure he'll give his first name anyway. I'm sure.
Okay, his name is Mitko.
Mitko. M-I-T-K-O-H?
M-I-T-K-O.
Oh, M-I-T-K-O. Okay.
And he's a doctoral student.
Okay, so should we go ahead and dive in then, Rhonda?
Yes, I thought it might be really lovely to begin with a definition of perfectionism so we know what we're talking about. Okay, well, I'll let you guys give that. Okay, can I give it a try? Yeah.
Go for it.
I think perfectionism is when you defeat yourself because you have set up unrealistic goals and overly high standards for yourself, and that when you settle for nothing short of an absolutely magnificent performance in anything you do or everything you do, you have to settle for nothing because you can never reach your goal or your standards.
You can't get the all, so you feel like you're ending up with nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, all or nothing thinking is the key distortion in all of perfectionism. What's your definition of it, Adam?
I liked that definition, Rhonda. I think the way that I would put it is perfectionism is the idea that you're not allowed to make mistakes or fail or it's not good enough. That it has to be without any flaw.
Yeah, that's a great one too, and my definition again would be similar to the two of you, just putting it in slightly different language. Would be that perfectionism is doesn't have so much to do with shooting to do something outstanding or great or wonderful. It's not a problem to have high standards, but perfectionism means that when you don't achieve your standards, when you're falling short or screwing up, you're, ruthlessly condemning of yourself and beating up on yourself. For example, I got hung up with AI on an important paper I'm working on, and I thought it could help me with the footnotes. And then I realized after struggling with it, it claimed it was an expert on footnotes, and I went through about 20 exchanges with it, and then I suddenly discovered that it had been rewriting my paper every time I contacted it, and rewriting it in a semi-psychotic manner, all the while telling me he was making it flawless and perfect. And I ended up with a piece of garbage on my hands, and I've had to redo all the statistics and all the references and all the introduction and discussion. But I've been a little pissed off at AI, but I didn't beat up on myself. I said, well, this was a good learning experience, and I'll have to start over and analyze the data again. But that's kind of a busy task, but kind of a fun one. And it's I haven't been hard on myself about it. And I think that's the key, that the person who's a perfectionist is generally much harder on yourself than you are on other people.
I really like the nuance in your definition, because I think a lot of times we think perfectionism is having high standards, but what I'm hearing you say is that it's not having high standards, it's I'm not okay unless I perfectly meet these high standards. That the problem isn't the high standards. The problem is that you're unwilling to accept a world where you're not meeting that standard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm shooting on this paper for being the best paper I've ever written, maybe one of the breakthrough paper in the whole field of psychotherapy research and psychology. And I've had some papers in the past, that I've won top awards in the world for. So it's not unrealistic, but it's a high standard. But I have no idea if it'll even get published. And if it doesn't, oh well, be proud of yourself for the effort and passion and love you put into this article. But I think it will be published somewhere, and it will make an impact. In fact, we've already gotten an informal version of it published in Psychology Today magazine, kind of a pop psychology version, and people seem very interested. But it's, as I've gotten older, I've just gotten to be, and I've learned from my cats to be more tender toward myself and try to be toward other people as well. And that's anti-perfectionistic for sure. My show notes for this episode will be anti-perfectionistic.
Well, David, one of the questions that Mitko wrote was specifically toward you, to ask you how your view of perfectionism has evolved since writing your book, Feeling Good.
Well, I think that's a great question, as were all of the questions. And there has been a big evolution, maybe on many levels, but I'll just mention one, and then you folks might have some great stuff to add to this as well. One is I've thought in the past that more or less that you have one approach to distorted thoughts. You put a distorted thought, I'm not good enough, in a recovery circle during the methods part of TEAM, M equals methods, the last phase. And then we select from the 100 or more than 100 techniques that I've learned or borrowed or developed for challenging negative thoughts, and then you fill in 10 or 15 methods around that recovery circle that you try one at a time until you've crushed that thought, like I'm not as good as I should be, or that would be identify the distortions. It's a should statement to explain the distortions. It's blah, 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 examine the evidence, experimental technique, double standard, all of these methods. But then you also have the self-defeating beliefs. When you do a downward arrow on a negative thought, you can come to the self-defeating beliefs, which are, in theory, working at a deeper level. You come up with the like perfectionism or perceived perfectionism or the achievement addiction, basing your self-esteem on being perfect or thinking you have to be a great achiever to be happy and worthwhile, etc. And the way that you focus on defeating those is you go through a sequence. Like, first of all, you take the thought, I should always try to be perfect. And then you do a cost-benefit analysis. How will this help you? How will this hurt you? And then weigh the two lists against each other on a 100-point basis. And by the way, that's not making a list of the advantages and disadvantages of being perfect. That's not an option. It's the advantages and disadvantages of telling yourself you should always try to be perfect. And then if the disadvantages are greater, as they frequently will be, then you use the semantic method to say, what belief could I give myself other than I should always be perfect, or I should always try to be perfect? Could you revise that so you had all of the advantages and none of the disadvantages? And that's kind of a philosophical question, but a very interesting one. And you guys might have some ideas about that. But that's just an intellectual change, something to hang your hat on. If you're going to give up your perfectionism, you need a new belief to hang your hat on. And then after that, you could do the experimental technique. Like with the pleasure predicting sheet or other experiments. Is it really true that nothing is worth doing unless I do it perfectly? And then you can also do a feared fantasy where you have an encounter with someone from hell who is telling you you're not perfect, you're not good enough, I condemn you, whatever your fears are of what's going to happen if you're not perfect. And that's a very fun sequence to go through. It's very helpful. But lately, working with Jill, we've kind of Jill Levitt, when we do live work and teach the Tuesday group, we've come to actually a new and slightly different view of it. And we now think that working on your negative thoughts at a moment when you were being perfectionistic and upset, just a normal daily mood log and writing down the thoughts and identifying the distortions in them and challenging them with any of 10 or 20 or 30 different powerful techniques is the way to defeat the perfectionism. In other words, you defeat it in reality at a particular moment in time, using practical, real examples of when it's interfering with your life and changing your thinking at that time. But I still think that both approaches have a lot of value and can complement each other. And one last thing I could say on this is that you can also put a belief in a recovery circle. I should always be perfect, or I should always try to be perfect, and then select 10 or 15 or 20 techniques to attack that belief. I just gave you a series of 4: cost-benefit analysis, semantic method, experimental method, and feared fantasy. But there are many other methods that can be used, too, to attack that thought. So that's the latest from evolution in my own thinking. Having babbled all of that out, we will now ask two beloved and esteemed colleagues share your thoughts on that aspect.
Adam?
I would tend to agree with you about looking at the one singular moment, and partially because of the way that perfectionism operates, which I think one of the reasons that we tend to get really stuck in perfectionism is just sort of the nature of it. And so, for instance, when we're looking to deal with our perfectionism, we might even get caught in the trap of trying to find the perfect moment or the perfect time to deal with our perfectionism, that we may think now is not enough, so we need to look at it in the future. And when you narrow down to one single moment where you're experiencing the perfectionism, it sort of forces you to deal with it in the here and now, whether it's the perfect moment or not. And even that within itself can be a step towards learning to deal with perfectionism. And I think one thing that also comes to my mind in terms of what you're saying, David, is the importance of motivation in dealing with perfectionism. And if there's one thing to know about perfectionism, I think it's that the first step to deal with it is to recognize that you probably aren't going to want to give up the perfectionism, and partially because it's there for a good reason. And so the other thing that I really liked about that approach is the opportunity to use the cost-benefit analysis and understand some of the good reasons that you're choosing to be perfectionistic, and also some of the costs, and decide whether or not this is really a belief that you'd like to let go of or move from.
I support 200% what you're saying, and it's so important and so easily overlooked. It's not just a matter of cognitive techniques, but the motivational techniques. And there's no other emotional problem where motivation is as important as in perfectionism. And we had a recent podcast, or maybe not so recent, but was on Amy. You might remember those part 1 and part 2. Rhonda. Mm-hmm. And Amy was this highly successful psychiatrist on the East Coast who used to be in the Tuesday group, and she was beating the hell out of herself because she had 2 patients she was stuck with, and she just couldn't stand it, and she couldn't sleep at night, and she was anxious. She was telling herself, "I'm a failure and a fraud. I should give up the practice of psychiatry," all of these extremely brutal messages. And we can see if we can find those podcast numbers and put them in the show notes.
Yes, I have them. They're 388 and 389.
Yes, okay. 388 and 389. Yes, excellent. And the positive reframing, after we empathized with her in her misery, we did the positive reframing, and it was really powerful. And it's to say, what are some positive things about your negative thoughts and feelings, and what does it show about you and your core values that's awesome, and what are some advantages of this kind of perfectionism. And that was very powerful. With our help, she came up with 10 or 15 overwhelming real positives of her perfectionism, which she's had ever since she was a little girl. And that's been her whole philosophy, to bring the best possible treatment to people who are struggling. She wanted to do that even when she was a little girl. And that one thing, it was really, really something. And her perfectionism showed so much humility that she has. People might be intimidated. She teaches at Johns Hopkins, and she's got a booming clinical practice, and she's a lovely, brilliant individual. But then when you see her suffering, you feel so close to her. So suddenly, it makes her real and beautiful. And when we do that positive reframing, and to see the positives that are hiding in your negatives, like if you're listening right now, you may have a lot of negative thoughts now, or at times where you're beating up on yourself and ripping yourself to shreds, and intense negative feelings. And there's a lot of beauty in your suffering as well. And when we bring that beauty out, that tends to reduce or eliminate the shame. You no longer feel like you're struggling with a mental disorder or a flaw, like your perfectionism is some kind of a DSM mental disorder or something, and instead you see it as something of great beauty, something to be proud of. And then this is the paradox, the moment you become proud of your symptoms instead of ashamed of them, then rapid recovery is just a stone's throw away.
Yes.
Yeah, I think just very well said.
Yeah, I'm happy that you brought that up, because we dove into the methods without first talking about that. We're going to be following the entire team structure that includes the assessment of the resistance, both with the process and with our outcome, what we say we want our outcome to be.
That's such a great point, Rhonda, because we all want to jump in and help. And that's the cause of virtually all therapeutic failure.
Yeah. Well, my thinking of perfectionism changed too when it really dawned on me how much anxiety is involved with perfectionism. And I tried to figure out, how can we use exposure for someone who is struggling with perfectionism? And I was working with a young man who could not turn his papers in high school because every word he wanted to be perfect. And his teacher said, please turn in a C-level paper. I'd rather have you turn in a C-level paper than you strive for an A+ and turn in nothing. So we worked out a response prevention exposure kind of a thing where he had to sit at his desk and write an imperfect paper. And every few minutes he'd have to jot down how anxious he was feeling and whatever negative thoughts he was having. And he just had
0 to 100.
Yeah, from 0 to 100. And and it actually didn't take the first time. He had to do it a couple of times because I wanted him to just sit and feel as anxious as he possibly could about how imperfect his high school papers would be. And so, like I said, it took a couple of times, and it took actually a couple of hours, but eventually he stuck it out. And he overcame his need for perfectionism because he was overcoming the anxiety that was surrounding it.
Oh,
when I hear
cool.
Yeah, when I hear both of these stories, I just think about the perfectionism and again how it's operating for the person. And on one hand, I feel a lot of sadness for the suffering and especially the extreme anxiety and how much it requires you to beat yourself up. But then I see the beauty in two people that care very deeply about their performance and making sure that they're doing a good job and who really just want to be putting it all out there and succeeding. And I think in that way, you really do see that perfectionism has a purpose and it sort of comes with a cost at the same time, and makes a lot of sense that it was hard for him to put that down. Like if you think about the selling point of, hey, I want you to just be okay with possibly handing in a paper for which you can get a C, that doesn't sound like a very attractive offer to anyone, especially someone who cares a lot about succeeding. And at the same time, to go through that and see it through, you have the opportunity to see what life feels like when you don't have this really intense perfectionistic standard.
Beautifully stated. I think the idea of average practice is a kind of a relatively newer practice, like what you did, and so creatively, Rhonda. Although it's been with me since the very beginning of my work on perfectionism, but I practice that all the time. Like in the show notes, I send them out, and I just say, this is just something to have for show notes. And it's, I wrote it off the top of my head without editing. And you often go through and always actually, Rhonda, and lovingly edit it and find, typos and things like that. But most of the time people say, oh gosh, these show notes are really, really excellent. And,
yeah.
And that really helps me so much to aim to be average, dare to be average. I think that was the title of a chapter I wrote in some book, or should have if I didn't. But
no, that is a chapter in a book.
Yeah.
In a book called Feeling Good.
Yeah. Oh, so that's the name of the chapter? Dare to be average?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was pretty good when he was young before he got old and decrepit.
That's chapter 14.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Dare to be average. Cool.
It is a really brave thing to be willing to be average in a world where you perceive a lot of perfectionism. It's a very vulnerable thing to let people see your flaws.
Yeah. And that's what we're doing right now. We're all just trying to be average and hang out and have fun. And that's actually what people want. They don't want some meticulous, overly intellectual, detailed exposition on the history of perfectionistic thinking. They just want to hear our hearts and our experiences and our thinking about ourselves and our patients. And I've often emphasized how much I learned from, my cat, Obi, who was, far from perfect. He wasn't a show cat. He was just almost dead when he came to our kitchen door. He was feral, and he came, hoping to get some food. So he was on the verge of death. And he became our cat. Even though he was feral, he became my best friend in the world. And he taught me so much about love and joy. And now, I take that. We have a new little kitty that, well, not new, she's old, but we adopted this older cat from the Humane Society of Silicon Valley, Sweetie Pie, and she's probably 10 or 12 years old now. We've had her about 4 years. But she just loves to be with her daddy or her mommy. And so I was, before here, I was sitting in the kitchen heating up something to eat because I got up at about 4:30 to work this morning, and I haven't had anything to eat. And I thought in fact, I was munching on it right here on my plate before we started. But I was sitting waiting for it to heat up in the microwave, and she looked up at me real lovingly, and I said, "Sure, you can jump up on my lap." And then she jumped up, and I gave her some Petsies, and she just started purring instantly. And it wasn't a long, because I didn't have but a couple of minutes. I had to get down to meet you guys on time. But it was just a loving, wonderful episode. But she's just an average cat. She's nothing special. But we just love her, and she loves us. And, we're not perfect mommies and daddies either. But we have a lot of joy that we share with her, and it has nothing to do with being perfect. And that this show could be good or very good, but the joy that we have with each other and with our audience, that's the thing that's where the magic comes, and that has little or nothing to do with being perfect.
Right. It's the joy of being together.
Yeah. The magic of being alive. Like this, we're doing this right now. It's just so great that we're able to do this.
Yeah.
It's like magic.
This wonderfully average podcast we get to share with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, going back once again to Mitko's specific questions, do you think that perfectionism is rooted in the fear of not being good enough? Adam, that's one of the things that you like to work with, thought with people.
Let me go first because I have a long answer.
Okay.
That's pretty encyclopedic. But you asked, is perfectionism rooted in the fear of not being good enough? Answer, yes. Your turn.
Yeah, I'd say so. If there was one thing that changed a lot in my thinking when it comes to perfectionism is I used to think it was a problem, which again is part of the trap, because you then don't allow yourself to even acknowledge the fact that you have some perfectionistic thinking. But I've realized perfectionism is not a problem. It's actually a solution, and it's a solution to deal with feeling not good enough. And unfortunately, it's a solution that comes with a cost. And typically it's the cost of your happiness and even potentially your motivation in the pursuit of excellence, because now it only feels like you get to be good enough if you're perfect, which keeps you on almost an infinite treadmill of trying to be perfect, not feeling good enough, trying to be perfect. And the hardest part is, to some degree, it can work. You can really feel like you're good enough or worthwhile when you get close to perfect or when you do something just right. But the second that slips, the second that you make a mistake, which we all do, I don't think there's a single day that goes by where I don't make, probably thousands of mistakes. You end up losing your entire sense of self-esteem, and it feels like you're always on the edge of slipping out of that perfectionism and feeling not good enough once again.
That's neat. Was there a time, Adam, when you felt that you were not good enough?
Once or twice, and I might confess that, of course, even this morning, my mind started to wonder and judge whether or not I would do a good enough job at this podcast, for which I had to step back.
I was wondering about it too. I had my doubts until the podcast started, and now I know that my doubts were valid.
That's right, for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one of the things that you mentioned was a cost-benefit analysis of telling yourself that you should be perfect. What are the advantages of making mistakes?
Well, for one thing, if you don't beat up on yourself, it's a great way to learn. Like yesterday, the woman on the podcast who was sobbing uncontrollably. Well, it was a Q&A podcast, and I hadn't anticipated what if somebody comes up and starts sobbing uncontrollably. How can we prevent that, or how can we deal with that? And so you can't prevent yourself from making mistakes. And I didn't know how to handle it. But then afterwards, I thought, my gosh, she's really struggling, and maybe I should give her a little time and help her out, because I think that's what she was kind of asking for. And then so now I've been exchanging emails with her, and it's very gratifying, to when someone asks for help and you can provide help and they appreciate it. It's the greatest feeling in the world. But by not beating up on myself, I think it opened up the door for the right path forward. So instead of dwelling on my own feeling of embarrassment or anxiety about having not known what to do in front of a large audience, I focused on her and how much she was hurting, and how just very little input from me of a compassionate type might mean a lot to her. And lo and behold, it really seems to have. So for me, I make mistakes all the time, but being ashamed of them or beating up on myself for them just doesn't make sense anymore, even though for many years that was the story of my life. Thinking if I beat up on myself, eventually some wonderful thing will happen. And a lot of wonderful things happened. I did some great research, and I learned a lot of therapy techniques. But there was a price to be paid, and now that I've largely given that up, I'm just as productive and creative as ever, probably more so.
Oh, that's a great story. Yeah. So an advantage of making a mistake is it's a great way to learn.
Yeah. And also a great way to love yourself.
A great way to love yourself. And imagine it's a great way to have other people love you. Like people listening to you in that Q&A, how they don't want to see perfect David that they could never relate to.
I was wondering about that.
They want to see like a human David who makes mistakes and learns.
Full.
Who's just like all the rest of us.
Yeah.
I went to a workshop that was taught by a different person.
Guru.
Yeah. Who, I won't say his name because I don't want to be rude, but he was so striving for perfection. It was annoying. And
it wasn't that family systems theory guy, was it?
No.
Oh.
No. But he made a really huge mistake. I'm a martial artist, and he started talking about this woman who was leaving a relationship where she was being abused, and then she left the relationship, and then she got her black belt degree in like 9 months, and that's absolutely impossible. And then she bought a karate studio so that she could teach people. And I went up to him on the break and said, that's another story about this woman being taken advantage of, because no one can earn a black belt in 12 months. It took me 8 years. And it seems like she's being exploited. So I just want to let you know that's a really terrible example of a woman being abused. And he was like, oh, okay, thanks for telling me. And a friend of mine went to his class a year later, and I asked her, did he tell this story about a woman who became a martial artist in 9 months to a year? And she said, yeah, he told that story. And I thought, oh, here's this guy striving to be perfect. I don't know if this fits in, but he couldn't adapt.
Yeah.
I don't know if that fits in.
I think that does fit, Rhonda. I think what I'm hearing you say is that making mistakes, especially in public, first off, allows people to relate to you. The second thing is, interestingly, it actually helps people learn from you. Like, people have the opportunity to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that you're saying that I think is really important is that the ability to acknowledge and look at our mistakes allows us to adapt and connect with other people through that adaptation, but also to move closer to what we're wanting. Like, hypothetically, this person really wants people to know and understand the power of what he's teaching better. And if he's able to acknowledge those mistakes,
and worship him.
Right. And because he wasn't able to adapt, I just thought, oh, well, what else is he not teaching correctly?
Yeah. He doesn't want to let go of his narrative that he's Mr. Big, and jump over to Mr. Real. And that people are longing for people to be real, to accept themselves, and that's a joyous thing that we see so often in our Tuesday group, and I'm sure you see it in your Wednesday group. And that when people reveal our flaws, that's when the magic happens.
Yeah,
it's not in
and in a weird way, making mistakes actually makes you more credible.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. So true. Yeah. And also, you see that if you make a mistake, you're not going to die. Like, you're not going to collapse. You're not going to have a heart attack. You're not going to be nothing. You made a mistake. You can learn from it.
Yeah, that's what I was telling myself. And I was thinking about you when I was driving the other night, and I was really sleepy. And I thought maybe I should pull off the road and get a little sleep. But then I told myself, no, I don't need to be perfect. I can just kind of go along like this. I don't have to totally.
No.
Right. And then I ended up with a head-on collision with a truck. And I died instantly.
I can't believe we're talking. That's some extreme exposure, David.
Yeah. Okay, enough goofiness, but goofy is good too. That's kind of anti-perfectionistic. How about this last question that he has of how does perfectionism manifest itself in professional and personal environments? Was that the question?
In academic or professional, but we could also talk about personal. I think that fits.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you folks take first crack at this one. But by the way, I'm so glad we did this, because I think people just enjoy the energy, and then when we talk about it and share about it, that's what the podcast is about. It's not like having cookie cutter answers to things.
Right.
It's about just kind of having some joy that people are listening and caring about our podcast and each other, and maybe learning and growing a little bit, sometimes from our errors. But you two jump off first. How does it manifest itself? Let's say in your personal life, or in an academic setting, or in a professional setting. This is a really good question.
It is a really good question. I think one of the things that I like about it, and about what you just said, David, is that it really does differ from person to person. And part of what causes it to differ is really what you're aiming at with your perfectionism. And I think one of the ways that it shows up really often in academic, professional, and even personal life is procrastination, kind of putting off tasks because you're afraid that they're not going to be done perfectly, and sort of being unwilling to start unless you know you can do it perfectly, which of course is a really high measure and often leads to things not being started at all, or waiting until the exact last minute when you absolutely have to do it or else.
Yeah. So that's beautiful there. I love that. What are some of your thoughts?
I'm thinking of personal. I think, Adam, that was a really beautiful response to academic professional environments. And just to add to that, it creates a lot of anxiety if you're worried about a promotion or you're worried about tenure and you're striving to be so perfect that you're in that state of paralysis. That creates so much anxiety and fear. It's really hard to live with and hard to achieve your goals when you're paralyzed with those feelings. I'm thinking that in personal relationships, if I'm so striving to be perfect and I'm critical of myself and I'm judging myself, I'm also probably going to be judging people around me since no one is perfect. And who wants to be in a relationship with somebody judgmental and critical? So it limits my ability to have friends or to be in a community or a relationship.
Yeah, awesome. I'll pitch in one manifestation of perfectionism is you get defensive when criticized.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the biggest problems in intimate, loving, or professional relationships, that when people criticize you, you kind of get all bent out of shape, and you want to criticize them back and insist that they're wrong, rather than just finding truth in their criticism. And there always is truth in a criticism. And so defensiveness and its counterpart, aggression, are some of the biggest problems in the world, not only in terms of marriage or friendships but also even political parties, like the Trump group, and then the so-called lefties, the liberals, and no one wants to find truth in what the other group is saying. It's kind of like warfare, and then it becomes real warfare, and can often lead to murder and violence.
Yeah.
And then another expression that you didn't mention of perfectionism is, and then, by the way, that's tuned into the judging others that you were mentioning Rhonda. You have to be right all the time and feel like you're morally superior to other people, and then that justifies killing them or exploiting them or condemning them, or send them off to prison somewhere, or to a concentration camp of some kind, to rob people of their humanity. And because that's what Hitler was saying, that you're the Aryan people, you're superior to other people. And people get very seduced by that positive distortion. It's addictive to feel that we're better than someone else. How many of you out there feel like sometimes enjoy feeling like you're better than someone else? Raise your hands. So, okay, we all three have our hands up. And those of you who didn't raise your hands just now are what the Buddha called so many years ago. And you know what it is, Rhonda. Effing liars.
I was trying to think of another word for liars.
I was thinking bullshitters.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and we all have that addiction with us, but depression is another very serious consequence of perfectionism, and I would say depression that can be very severe and associated with hopelessness and leading to suicide or suicidal urges, and sadly, I would say that that's common, not rare.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I think the common point and the wisdom that I see in what both of you are saying, David and Rhonda, is that perfectionism really disconnects you, and it disconnects you either by putting you above other people, or it disconnects you because you're not showing your true and full self. Like you're in a bind. You either need to put yourself above people, or you need to show this like false version of you. And a lot of people who have perfectionism talk about feeling like an imposter. And as it turns out, you feel like an imposter because in some ways you're being an imposter. You're only showing people this like perfect and shiny and acceptable version of yourself.
Yeah.
And you're hiding like half of your reality, which is the fact that all of us, again, make mistakes and we mess up. And it feels like you constantly have to hide this part of you. And like I was saying at the beginning, I had a lot of this come back in me because I was in new environments around new people. And it took a lot of steps to be willing to show my imperfect, messy, stumbling self in order to finally feel connected and whole again. And I think that might be one of the biggest pains of perfectionism, is just how separate and how different and how other you end up feeling in your pursuit of being acceptable.
Yeah. Well, gosh, guys, this has been a wonderful hour, and it fell far short of perfection, however, fortunately. And it was just a lot of fun. And it was the name of the fellow who asked the question from North Macedonia, Mitko, MIT or M-I-K-O?
MITKO.
Yeah, Mitko. We love you, Mitko, and thank you for your question. And I hope your research and studies there, and I think you have some kind of conference coming up on perfectionism or some such, and I hope that's brings you a lot of success and joy and satisfaction with your work. I think it's a great topic that you're working on, and it's a challenging one as well. Like, how to measure perfectionism, what kind of scale. I developed a scale once for measuring it, and I found out that the scale really wasn't valid for a lot of reasons. And so that there are some good technical challenges there to get some solid research going to advance our understanding. Of course, our emphasis, the three of us, is what to do with people who are struggling in the here and now and working with us in our offices in a therapy session, and how do we get them most rapidly from the pits of hell to the joys of self-acceptance and enlightenment.
Sweet. I love that. So thank you, David, for wrapping things up in such a beautiful way. Yeah.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed our little imperfect podcast today. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. So until next time, have a great one, everyone.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.